Stop scrolling. This changes everything. Picture two people, same city, same economy, same month, same devastating news. They both got laid off on a Friday afternoon with 30 days' notice and zero guarantees. By Monday morning, their lives had already split into two completely different stories. The first person sat at the kitchen table with cold coffee, refreshing job boards at 2 a.m., texting friends things like, "The market is brutal right now," and "Nobody's hiring people like me." Every interview felt like a performance review they were already failing. Every silence from a recruiter confirmed the story running on a loop inside their head. This isn't going to work out. The second person woke up differently. Not cheerfully. They weren't naive. They knew the situation was serious, but something in how they moved through the world had shifted. They sent emails as if responses were already on the way. They walked into interviews as if the job was already theirs to lose. They made calls as if connections were inevitable. They didn't fake it. They inhabited it. 6 months later, you won't believe the gap between them. This isn't a story about luck. It isn't about privilege, connections, or circumstance. What separated these two people was a single, radical, deeply misunderstood shift in psychological operating system. One that the world's most effective performers have quietly used for decades, often without having a name for it. They lived as if everything was already working in their favor. And when you truly understand what that means, not as a bumper sticker, not as toxic positivity, but as a hardwired neurological and behavioral strategy, it will change the way you make decisions, build relationships, take risks, and ultimately shape the life you actually want. What you're about to read is not self-help fluff. It is a deep, chapter-by-chapter excavation of one of the most powerful psychological principles available to any human being alive today. Are you ready? Because this is where your story changes. The architecture of certainty. Why your mental framework determines everything. There's a question most people never ask themselves, even though it's governing nearly every decision they make. What am I assuming will happen next? Not consciously, not deliberately, but underneath every action you take, every conversation you enter, every risk you either seize or sidestep. There is a foundational assumption quietly running the show. And for most people, that assumption sounds something like this. I'm not sure this is going to work out. That low-grade uncertainty is not harmless background noise. It is an active force. It shapes your posture, your language, your eye contact, your persistence, your creativity, and your capacity to attract the very things you want. Most people don't realize they've been building their entire lives on a cracked foundation. And they've been doing it for so long, it just feels like reality. But here's what the science of psychology and neuroscience has been confirming for decades. Certainty. Not arrogance, not denial, but genuine operational certainty changes everything about how you function in the world. When you're certain that things are working in your favor, your brain doesn't just feel better, it operates differently. The reticular activating system, the neural filtering mechanism responsible for what you consciously notice, shifts its entire scanning pattern. Instead of hunting for threats, obstacles, and evidence of impending failure, it begins scanning for opportunities, open doors, and reasons to move forward. Think about the last time you were completely certain about something positive. Maybe you were certain a friend would come through for you in a crunch. Maybe you were certain a trip would be worth the hassle. Maybe you were certain you'd ace something you'd prepared for thoroughly. Remember how that certainty changed the energy you brought to the situation. You didn't waste processing power on backup plans for catastrophe. You simply moved. That is not a coincidence. That is neuroscience operating in your favor. The distinction that matters most here is the one between hope and certainty. Hope is wonderful, but hope always contains a shadow of doubt. Hope says, I really wish this will work out. Certainty says, this is working out. I may not be able to see the whole picture yet, but I trust the direction. Consider some of the most consequential figures in modern American history, not the ones born into advantage, but the ones who built something from apparent impossibility. The animator who pitched his theme park concept to 302 different financial institutions before finding his first yes. The talk show host who was told by network executives that she lacked the presence for television. The college dropout who insisted that a personal computer would eventually sit in every home. Back when personal computer wasn't even a common phrase. What these individuals shared wasn't a flawless plan. It wasn't the absence of rejection or setback. It was an operational certainty that sat beneath all of it, a deep, unshakable orientation that said, this is going somewhere. Their certainty wasn't a performance. It was a framework through which they interpreted every event, every rejection, every closed door. And here is the key insight that most people miss. Their certainty didn't come from evidence. It came first. The evidence came after. This is the architecture of certainty. It is not a conclusion you arrive at after things go well. It is a starting point you choose before you have proof. And choosing it, consistently, deliberately, even when it feels uncomfortable, is what separates the people who transform their lives from those who keep waiting for the right moment to begin. When you stop operating from I hope this works and start operating from this is working even when I can't see how, you stop second-guessing yourself at every intersection. You stop outsourcing your confidence to external validators. You stop waiting for the conditions to be perfect before you commit. And slowly, steadily, powerfully, the world begins to respond to the signal you're sending. Certainty is not the destination. It is the vehicle. And once you learn to drive it deliberately, there is almost no limit to where it can take you. The rewiring, how acting as if, literally rebuilds your brain. For most of the 20th century, scientists operated under a simple assumption about the human brain. It was fixed. You were born with a certain number of neurons, a certain wiring configuration, and that was largely that. By adulthood, the architecture was set. Then came neuroplasticity, and it changed everything. What neuroscientists have now confirmed through decades of research is that your brain is not a finished product. It is a living, dynamic system that rewires itself continuously based on the patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior you repeat most often. Every single day, your brain is either strengthening existing pathways or building new ones, and which pathways get reinforced depends almost entirely on what you choose to think about and how you choose to respond to your circumstances. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable, observable biology. When you operate from chronic uncertainty, when your default mode is, what if this fails, and I'm probably not capable enough, you are literally strengthening neural networks associated with threat detection, withdrawal, and learned helplessness. The more you practice this pattern, the more automatic it becomes. Eventually, pessimism isn't a mood. It's a default neural state. But the reverse is equally true, and this is where the real power lives. When you consistently choose to act as if things are working in your favor, you begin firing new neural circuits, pathways associated with confidence, resourcefulness, creative problem-solving, and forward momentum grow stronger with every repetition. Over time, these positive patterns don't require effort to maintain. They become your automatic operating system. The process begins with something neuroscientists call cognitive restructuring, the practice of catching fear-based thoughts and consciously redirecting them toward more empowering interpretations. When your mind whispers, "What if this doesn't pan out?" you learn to respond internally with, "This is finding its way, even if I can't see the full route yet." When the inner critic says, "I don't have what it takes," you redirect toward, "I have exactly what I need to navigate this." This is not delusion. This is not toxic positivity. This is training your meaning-making apparatus to default to interpretations that serve you, because your brain is making meaning constantly anyway, and you have far more influence over that process than you've been led to believe. The reticular activating system plays a starring role here. This dense cluster of neurons in your brainstem acts as a filter for the roughly 11 million bits of information your senses take in every second, of which your conscious mind can only process about 50. What makes it into your awareness is determined by what your brain has been instructed to look for. And what instructs it? Your dominant beliefs and expectations. If you deeply believe that the world is indifferent or hostile to your success, your RAS will serve you a daily highlight reel of evidence to support that belief. If you genuinely believe that things have a way of working out in your favor, it will serve you a different reel entirely, one full of possibilities, connections, and open doors you would have walked right past before. Visualization accelerates this rewiring process dramatically. When you regularly spend time vividly imagining yourself navigating challenges successfully, achieving specific goals, and experiencing the life you desire, your brain cannot fully distinguish these mental rehearsals from real experience. The neural pathways activated during vivid visualization are nearly identical to those activated by the actual event. You are literally pre-building the neural infrastructure for success before it happens in the physical world. And then there's the stress response. When you truly believe things are working in your favor, your autonomic nervous system shifts from chronic fight-or-flight activation toward a state of calm alertness, what researchers call the parasympathetic rest and digest mode. This isn't just good for your mood. This state optimizes memory consolidation, immune function, creative thinking, and interpersonal connection. The biology of certainty is the biology of peak performance. Perhaps most profoundly, consistent certainty rewires what psychologists call your locus of control, the degree to which you believe your actions genuinely influence your outcomes. People with a strong internal locus of control don't see themselves as passengers in their own lives. They see themselves as authors. And acting from certainty is one of the most reliable ways to strengthen this internal authorship over time. The rewiring doesn't happen overnight, but it begins immediately. Within days of consistent practice, subtle shifts in mood and motivation become noticeable. Within weeks, decision-making feels cleaner and faster. Within months, operating from certainty stops being a practice and becomes a personality. Your brain is waiting for the instructions you give it. Give it better ones, and watch what it builds. The prophecy you're already writing, self-fulfilling dynamics and how to hack them. Here is a truth that most people find simultaneously obvious and deeply uncomfortable. The future you expect is the future you're already creating. This is not mysticism. This is the self-fulfilling prophecy, one of the most rigorously documented phenomena in social science. And understanding it in full changes how you think about everything from job interviews to first dates to business launches. The self-fulfilling prophecy works like this. Your expectations about a future event shape your current behavior, and your current behavior influences the probability of that event occurring. When you expect success, you prepare differently, show up differently, persist longer, and communicate with a different quality of energy. These behavioral differences create real, measurable differences in outcomes. And those outcomes then either confirm or challenge the original expectation. Most people, however, are running a negative version of this loop without realizing it. They approach interviews expecting rejection, so they hold back in their answers, avoid strong eye contact, hedge their enthusiasm, and project a kind of low-grade desperation that interviewers can feel even when they can't name it. The rejection that follows feels like proof that the world doesn't want what they're offering, which strengthens the expectation of future rejection, which influences future behavior in the same limiting direction. The prophecy fulfills itself again and again, but flip the expectation, and you flip the entire cycle. Walk into an interview operating from the assumption that you're exactly what they've been looking for. Not arrogantly, but genuinely. And your entire presentation transforms. You ask sharper questions. You give more specific, confident answers. You listen actively because you're genuinely curious about them, not just trying to manage your own anxiety. You project the kind of settled energy that makes people want to say yes. The same outcome, getting hired, becomes dramatically more likely, not because you fabricated anything, but because your inner certainty reshaped your external presence in ways that actually matter. This dynamic operates in every domain of human experience. In entrepreneurship, founders who operate from the certainty that their venture will succeed make bolder decisions, invest more consistently in quality, build relationships as if they're long-term strategic partnerships, and solve problems with creative persistence rather than panic. Customers and collaborators sense this confidence and respond accordingly. Funding flows more readily. Partnerships form more organically, and early setbacks become data rather than devastation. In relationships, when you enter a social situation expecting genuine connection, you're warmer, more curious, more present. People feel seen by you. They open up more readily. Friendships deepen faster, and your expectation of meaningful connection gets confirmed, while someone across the room who entered expecting awkwardness is having a completely different evening in the same room. In health, research on expectancy effects, from the famous placebo studies to more recent work on exercise and aging, consistently shows that people who expect positive outcomes from health interventions experience measurably better results than those who don't. Expectation is not a soft variable. It is a biological input. What makes this principle so powerful is that you don't have to wait for external circumstances to validate your expectation before you adopt it. The research is clear. You can begin writing a better prophecy right now, with no external permission required. The moment you shift your expectation, you begin shifting your behavior. The moment you shift your behavior, you begin shifting your outcomes. The moment your outcomes shift, your expectation gets reinforced, and the new positive loop begins compounding. The most important word in the principle is act, not hope as if, not wish as if, act as if. Take the job interview with the energy of someone who already knows they're the right fit. Build the business with the conviction of someone who knows it's going to work. Enter the relationship with the openness of someone who believes they deserve love and connection. Because it is your actions, rooted in your expectations, that make the prophecy real. You are writing the future right now. The only question worth asking is, what kind of story are you telling? Making peace with the unknown. Why uncertainty is your most underrated asset. The single biggest obstacle preventing most people from acting as if everything is working in their favor has nothing to do with talent, resources, or opportunity. It has to do with their relationship with uncertainty. And that relationship, for most people, is deeply adversarial. We are wired to crave certainty. The human brain treats ambiguity as a low-grade threat, activating many of the same neural circuits that light up when you're facing a genuine physical danger. This is why uncertainty feels so uncomfortable, even when nothing bad has actually happened yet. Your nervous system doesn't reliably distinguish between, "I don't know what's going to happen," and "something is wrong." The result is that millions of people spend enormous amounts of cognitive and emotional energy trying to eliminate uncertainty, researching endlessly before deciding, seeking constant reassurance from others, waiting for the right time that never quite arrives, building elaborate contingency plans for failures that never materialized. All of this is unconsciously aimed at one goal: feeling certain before taking action. But here's what that strategy costs you. Uncertainty is precisely where opportunity lives. The outcomes worth pursuing, the ones that genuinely transform your life, are by definition not guaranteed. If they were, everyone would already be doing them. The career pivot that leads to your most fulfilling work requires stepping into the unknown. The relationship that changes your life requires vulnerability with no guaranteed return. The business that finally reflects your real capabilities requires launching before you have proof it will work. The people who build extraordinary lives are not those who eliminate uncertainty before acting. They are those who have developed a fundamentally different relationship with it, one that treats the unknown not as a threat but as a field of possibility. This shift is available to you right now, and it starts with one honest recognition. Certainty, as most people chase it, is mostly an illusion anyway. Think about the things you've always assumed were certain in your life. Careers that seemed permanent that weren't. Relationships that seemed stable that shifted. Plans that seemed solid that dissolved. The world doesn't actually offer the certainty most people are waiting for before they'll commit to living fully. What it offers instead is change. Constant, inevitable, sometimes brutal, often surprising change. And once you accept that change is the only real constant, something liberating happens. You stop fighting the nature of reality and start working with it. Acting as if everything is working in your favor doesn't require knowing how things will unfold. It requires trusting that you can handle whatever unfolds and turn it toward your benefit. This is a different, deeper, more durable form of security than certainty about outcomes. It is certainty about yourself. This reframe changes your relationship with risk entirely. Risk stops being the terrifying gap between where I am and where I want to be, and starts being the necessary space where growth actually happens. The real risk, properly understood, is never the uncertain venture. It is staying safely in a life that no longer fits because you're waiting for guarantees that will never arrive. Perfectionism is just uncertainty wearing a more socially acceptable mask. When you delay because your plan isn't complete enough, your timing isn't ideal, your resources aren't sufficient, you're really just trying to make your way to action without ever having to step into the unknown. But the unknown is non-negotiable. You cannot go around it. You can only go through it. And the people who go through it most effectively are those who have learned to move with curiosity rather than resistance. Building tolerance for uncertainty is a trainable skill, not a fixed personality trait. You build it incrementally. Make one decision today without polling everyone you know first. Start one conversation without knowing exactly where it's going. Apply for one opportunity before you meet every stated qualification. Each small act of forward movement into uncertain territory strengthens your capacity for larger ones. The people who change the world are not those who eliminate the unknown before acting. They are those who have learned to dance with it. and trust that the dance itself is taking them somewhere worth going. The assumptions running your life, and how to choose better ones. Every single day from the moment you wake up, you are operating on assumptions. Dozens, hundreds, most of them invisible, most of them inherited from your upbringing, your culture, your past experiences, your inner circle. And here is what almost nobody tells you. These assumptions are not neutral. They are creative forces. They shape your behavior, which shapes your outcomes, which shape your future. The radical act at the center of this book is this: choose your assumptions deliberately. Most people don't realize they're choosing at all. They experience their assumptions as simply the way things are, the realistic assessment of a clear-eyed adult who has learned from experience. But what they're actually experiencing is a filtered interpretation of reality, generated by a brain that learned early in life to make certain predictions based on certain patterns. And that filtering system can be updated. It must be updated if you want your life to move in a genuinely new direction. Let's get concrete about how assumptions operate in the smallest corners of daily life, because the small corners are where the large changes are quietly built. Imagine your morning. If you start the day assuming it's going to be hectic, stressful, and draining, you reach for your phone before you've even sat up, checking for problems to manage. You rush through preparation. You arrive at your first commitment already behind, already braced. Your nervous system is in low-level alert before anything challenging has even happened. And from that starting point, relatively minor obstacles feel like confirmation of the story you already believed. Now imagine the same morning from a different assumption. Today has the potential to be productive, connected, and interesting. You move with a bit more intention. You're slightly more patient in traffic because you left with adequate time. You arrive at your first meeting curious rather than defensive. You're more likely to notice something useful or encouraging that you would have missed in reactive mode. The external conditions might be nearly identical, but you're having a completely different experience of them. Scale this up across weeks, months, and years, and you begin to understand why two people navigating similar circumstances can arrive at such dramatically different places in their lives. It isn't always talent, network, or luck. It's often the cumulative weight of thousands of daily micro-assumptions that either opened doors or held them closed. In professional settings, assumptions about your colleagues and supervisors shape every interaction you have with them. Assume your manager is invested in your growth, and you'll ask more questions, seek more feedback, and demonstrate more initiative, all of which tend to produce better outcomes and more professional development. Assume your manager is indifferent or antagonistic, and you'll hold back, protect yourself, and become exactly the kind of disengaged employee who confirms the organization's low expectations. In financial life, the assumption that abundance is possible for you, not guaranteed, but genuinely available, creates behavioral patterns that compound toward prosperity. People who assume they will always struggle financially tend to make decisions from scarcity, avoid investing in their own development, and see opportunities as things that happen to other people. People who assume that financial growth is within their reach tend to invest in their skills, negotiate more confidently, and build the relationships that create economic momentum. Even your physical health is subject to this dynamic. Research has consistently shown that people's expectations about their own bodies, their capacity to heal, to improve with exercise, to respond to treatment, measurably influence actual outcomes. Your assumptions about what your body is capable of shape how you treat it, which shapes what it actually does. The practice of assumption awareness is simple and immediately actionable. Throughout your day, pause occasionally and ask yourself, what am I currently assuming about this situation? When you notice a limiting assumption, this meeting is going to be pointless. That person doesn't really want to help me. This opportunity isn't for someone like me. You have the power to replace it with a more empowering one. Not because you're pretending, but because the empowering interpretation is genuinely just as plausible, and it serves you so much better. You are already making assumptions. The only question is whether they're working for you or against you. Choose deliberately and watch your entire daily experience begin to shift. Your energetic signature, the science behind why people are drawn to certainty. Let's talk about something that most serious people dismiss as too abstract and then spend the rest of their lives unconsciously experiencing: energy. Not in a mystical sense, in a deeply practical, behaviorally observable, biologically measurable sense. When you walk into a room, you are broadcasting a signal, not through your words. Words come later. Through your posture, your pace, the quality of your attention, the ease or tension in your face, the presence or absence of genuine groundedness in how you carry yourself. People read these signals in fractions of a second, mostly below conscious awareness, and it shapes how they respond to you before a single word is spoken. When you operate from genuine certainty, from the lived experience of someone who actually believes things are working in their favor, your signal is different. Your nervous system is more settled. Your breathing is deeper. Your eye contact is steadier. You listen rather than perform. You ask questions from curiosity rather than from strategy. You offer ideas without the anxious need for immediate validation. This creates a distinct, palpable quality of presence that other people find genuinely magnetic. Think about the people in your own life who carry this quality. Not the loudest people, not the most impressive on paper people, but the ones who make you feel more capable simply by being in a conversation with them. The ones who seem to always know something will work out, not through naivety, but through a kind of deep structural confidence. There's almost certainly someone like this in your memory, and you almost certainly gravitated toward them, wanted their advice, wanted to collaborate with them, wanted to be associated with whatever they were building. That quality is not a personality type. It is not a gift some people are born with and others aren't. It is an energetic state that is the natural output of a particular psychological orientation. And that orientation is exactly what this book is teaching you to cultivate. The science of social contagion tells us that emotional and energetic states are genuinely infectious. Mirror neurons, discovered in the 1990s, fire both when you perform an action or experience an emotion, and when you observe someone else doing the same. This means that spending time in the presence of someone who embodies certainty and positive expectation literally begins to reshape your own neural patterns in the same direction. Who you spend time with is not just a social preference. It is a neurological input. This works in reverse as well. When you show up to an important conversation, meeting, or opportunity, vibrating at the frequency of anxiety and desperation, even if you're saying all the right words, the people across from you feel it. They instinctively pull back. They add conditions. They hesitate to commit. They can't articulate why exactly. They just sense that something is off. What they're sensing is the signal beneath your signal. I'm not sure this is going to work out. Now consider the implications for every high-stakes interaction in your life. The job negotiation, the client pitch, the first date, the difficult conversation with a family member, the funding request. In every one of these situations, the energy you bring is at least as important as the content you deliver, and in many cases, it's more important. Gratitude is one of the most reliable and immediate tools for shifting your energetic state. When you genuinely focus on what is already working in your life, not as a performance, but as an honest inventory of real good, your nervous system responds almost instantly. Cortisol drops, oxytocin rises, your posture actually shifts, your voice becomes warmer, the signal you broadcast changes, and so do the responses you receive. Your physical environment also contributes to your energetic signature. Cluttered, disordered spaces tend to generate cluttered, disordered mental states. Clean, intentional, aesthetically considered environments support the kind of calm clarity that produces genuine certainty. This is why so many high performers are deliberate about their workspaces, morning environments, and the sensory inputs they allow into their daily lives. The content you consume, news, social media, entertainment, conversations, is also energetic input. Every media diet creates a mood baseline. Choose inputs that nourish the frequency of confidence, possibility, and forward momentum. This is not about living in a bubble. It is about being intentional with the signal you're building and maintaining inside yourself. Your energetic state is a choice you make moment by moment. External circumstances influence it, but they don't determine it. You do. Choose accordingly. When everything falls apart, transforming setbacks into launch pads, here is where most people abandon the principle. Here is where they decide it doesn't actually work, or that it works for other people. People with better circumstances, better connections, better timing, but not for them. Because here is where things stop going according to plan. The job offer falls through. The business doesn't grow the way you projected. The relationship ends painfully. The investment loses value. The health diagnosis arrives when you least expected it. The plan you built with such care and certainty collapses in ways you couldn't have predicted. This is the moment of maximum leverage, and almost nobody uses it correctly. Most people treat setbacks as verdicts, as evidence that the optimistic orientation was naive, that the universe doesn't actually work the way this book suggests, that the right response is to contract, protect, and lower expectations before they get crushed again. This reaction is understandable. It is also the most expensive mistake you can make. Because every single setback you have ever survived, and you have survived all of them so far, contains something your straightforward path to success could not have given you. Every rejection contained a redirection. Every loss contained a clearing. Every failure contained information that your eventual success would require. This is not a comforting platitude. It is a pattern that becomes visible when you begin deliberately looking for it in your own history. The corporate career that ended abruptly and forced the entrepreneur to finally start the company they'd been putting off for years. The romantic relationship that ended badly and made space for a partnership of a completely different quality. The business pivot forced by a failed product launch that led to a far more scalable model. The health crisis that stripped away everything non-essential and reconnected someone with what actually mattered in their life. These patterns are everywhere, in the stories of ordinary people and extraordinary ones alike. What separates those who find the gift in the setback from those who don't is not resilience as a personality trait. It is a practiced orientation, the deliberate choice to approach every setback with the question, how might this be serving me, rather than, why is this happening to me? This shift from victim to student is everything. When you ask, how is this serving me, you activate a completely different part of your brain. The threat detection circuitry quiets slightly. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for executive reasoning, creative problem solving, and long-term planning, engages more fully. You begin to find things that were genuinely invisible from your previous vantage point. Language matters enormously here. How you describe a setback to yourself and others either locks you into the experience or frees you from it. When you call something a failure, your brain treats it as a conclusion, a dead end. When you call it a redirect, a pivot point, a course correction, your brain treats it as information, a data point in an ongoing story. The same event, described differently, produces different neurological responses and therefore different behavioral outcomes. The resilience that comes from this orientation is qualitatively different from the resilience that comes from simple toughness. Toughness says, I can take a hit and stay standing. Certainty-based resilience says, every hit is bringing me closer to where I need to be. The first requires enormous amounts of energy to maintain. The second generates its own momentum. When you truly inhabit the belief that everything is working in your favor, temporary setbacks become exactly what the word suggests: temporary. They are events in your story, not the end of it. They are chapters, not conclusions. And the energy that would have been consumed by devastation gets redirected toward learning, adapting, and moving with even greater clarity toward the destination. Your greatest setbacks are not evidence against the principle. They are the principle in action, working at a deeper level than your conscious plans could have reached. Trust the process, even when, especially when, the process looks nothing like what you expected. The relationship revolution, how certainty transforms the way you love and connect. Everything we've explored so far, certainty, neuroplasticity, self-fulfilling prophecy, energetic resonance, converges in the domain of human connection with particular intensity. Because relationships are the arena where your deepest assumptions about yourself and the world are most immediately tested, most nakedly revealed, and most powerfully transformed. When you operate from genuine certainty that life is working in your favor, the way you show up in every relationship changes at a structural level. Start with romantic connection. When you carry the inner knowing that you are worthy of love, not as a concept you've convinced yourself of intellectually, but as a lived, felt reality, you stop tolerating dynamics that contradict that knowing. You don't cling to incompatible partners out of scarcity. You don't compromise your core values to avoid the discomfort of aloneness. You don't interpret every difficulty as evidence that you're fundamentally unlovable. Instead, you approach intimacy from a place of genuine wholeness, not needing another person to complete you, but genuinely wanting to share yourself with someone who meets you at your level. This changes who you attract, not through any mystical mechanism, but through the observable behavioral reality that healthy people are drawn to other healthy people. When you're desperate, you attract toward your desperation. When you're grounded, you attract toward your groundedness. The quality of your intimate relationships is a fairly accurate reflection of your inner baseline. And as your inner baseline rises, so does the caliber of what becomes possible. In your friendships, operating from certainty means you stop requiring your friends to be different than they are in order for you to feel okay. You can love people without needing to fix them. You can offer support without rescuing. You can be present without being consumed. And because you're not approaching friendships from a place of need, you're free to choose connections based on genuine resonance and mutual growth rather than familiarity or convenience. Professional relationships shift dramatically under this orientation as well. When you believe that the people around you, colleagues, clients, collaborators, are fundamentally on your side, or at minimum capable of being so, you communicate differently. You're more direct, more generous, more likely to share ideas openly rather than protecting them anxiously, more likely to ask for help rather than suffering through problems alone. This kind of collegial generosity tends to create the very trust and collaboration you were already assuming was possible. The prophecy at work again, in real time. One of the most underappreciated dimensions of this shift is what it does to your capacity for conflict. When you believe everything is working in your favor, disagreements stop feeling like threats and start feeling like information. When a partner, colleague, or friend sees something differently than you do, your first response can be curiosity rather than defensiveness. What are they seeing that I'm not? Rather than, how do I protect my position? This creates conversations of a completely different quality, ones that often lead to better solutions than either party had arrived at independently. Your relationship with your own family, the group of people who know you most completely and wound you most specifically, also transforms. From a place of certainty, you can engage with difficult family dynamics without being destabilized by them. You can love people with complicated histories without requiring them to behave differently before you allow yourself peace. You can participate in family systems while maintaining the psychological sovereignty that allows you to show up as the version of yourself you've chosen to be, rather than regressing into old inherited patterns every time you cross the threshold. And then there is the relationship that underpins all of them, the one you have with yourself. When you genuinely believe that things are working in your favor, self-compassion becomes natural rather than effortful. You stop auditing yourself with the severity of a prosecuting attorney and start engaging with yourself with the patience of a good mentor. You trust your instincts more readily. You make decisions with less second-guessing. You acknowledge mistakes as part of the process rather than evidence of fundamental inadequacy. This improved internal relationship creates an upward spiral in every other relationship you have. When you're not anxiously seeking external validation, you can be fully present with other people. When you're not afraid of rejection, you can love more freely. When you trust that things will work out, you can be authentic rather than strategic. The quality of your connections is one of the most accurate measures of where you are in this journey. As your certainty deepens, your relationships deepen with it, becoming sources of genuine nourishment, joy, and mutual expansion, rather than sources of stress, maintenance, and diminishment. The world you create through the lens of certainty is, first and most visibly, a world of richer human connection. And that, for most people, turns out to be the most meaningful transformation of all. Inspired action, the difference between moving and moving forward. Here is a misconception that needs to be addressed directly because it consistently prevents people from accessing the full power of what this book is teaching. Acting as if everything is working in your favor is not passive. It is not the spiritual equivalent of sitting in a lawn chair waiting for the universe to deliver. It is not magical thinking divorced from effort and accountability. It is, in fact, the foundation of the most productive, effective, and sustainable action available to a human being. The distinction worth understanding is between fear-based action and inspired action. Both involve doing things. Both can involve long hours, significant effort, and genuine commitment. But they operate from completely different internal engines, and they produce completely different results. Fear-based action is driven by what you're trying to avoid. The professional who works 70-hour weeks because they're terrified of financial failure. The entrepreneur who says yes to every opportunity because they're afraid of missing the one that matters. The networker who collects connections aggressively because they're convinced they'll be invisible without them. This kind of action is exhausting because it has no natural stopping point. Fear is never fully satisfied. And paradoxically, it often produces mediocre results because the constricted, desperate energy it generates repels the very people and opportunities it's trying to attract. Inspired action, by contrast, is driven by what you're moving toward. It emerges from the certainty that your goals are valid, your contribution is needed, and your efforts are building towards something real. It feels different than forced action, lighter, more energized, more creatively open. It is still rigorous. It still requires commitment and discipline, but it has a quality of alignment and flow that makes it sustainable in ways that fear-driven effort never is. The key to accessing inspired action consistently is learning to recognize the difference between the voice of fear and the voice of wisdom within you. Fear speaks in urgency, catastrophe, and worst-case scenarios. Wisdom speaks in clarity, simplicity, and what actually makes sense given what you know right now. When your next action is emerging from wisdom rather than fear, it tends to feel purposeful rather than frantic, and it tends to generate better results because it's aligned with what's actually true rather than what you're anxious about. One of the most counterintuitive aspects of inspired action is the value of strategic pausing. Most people take action to escape the discomfort of uncertainty, doing something, anything, because the stillness of not yet knowing is intolerable. But from a place of certainty, you can afford to wait for the right action to become clear, rather than taking reactive action just to feel productive. This patience is not procrastination. It is discernment, and it produces far more effective action when it comes. When you are taking inspired action from genuine certainty, you also begin to experience what athletes and artists call flow, those states of effortless absorption in a task where time seems to disappear and performance feels natural rather than forced. These states are not random or mysterious. They emerge reliably when your skill level is matched to your challenge level, when your attention is fully focused, and when you are operating from internal motivation rather than external pressure. Certainty creates the conditions for flow by eliminating the anxious self-monitoring that disrupts it. Your decision-making also transforms. Instead of agonizing over choices for days while seeking validation from every available source, you begin making decisions with appropriate swiftness and confidence. You trust that even an imperfect decision made from clarity is more valuable than a perfect decision deferred indefinitely. And you know, at a deep level, that course correction is always available to you, that no decision is irreversible enough to justify the paralysis of endless deliberation. The relationship between certainty and action is not sequential. Certainty first, then action. It is circular. Action taken from certainty generates outcomes that reinforce certainty. Certainty reinforced generates more inspired action. The loop builds on itself until moving forward becomes your natural operating rhythm, rather than something you have to force yourself into. Take one inspired action today, from the place of someone who knows things are working in their favor. Notice what it feels like. Notice what it generates. Then do it again tomorrow. Building faith that doesn't break, the architecture of unshakable belief. Faith in the context of this book has nothing to do with religion, though it can coexist beautifully with religious belief. Faith here means something precise and practical, the sustained conviction that things are working in your favor, maintained even in the absence of visible evidence, and especially in the presence of contradictory appearances. This kind of faith is not built on hope. It is built on evidence, specifically on the evidence of your own past. Consider this. You have navigated 100% of your hardest days so far. Every situation that felt unsurvivable, you survived. Every problem that seemed permanently unsolvable, you either solved or adapted to. Every loss you experienced eventually made space for something new. You may not have recognized this pattern clearly from inside the difficulty, but from where you stand now, looking back, it's there. The through line of your own resilience is far more consistent than your worst moments suggested. This historical evidence is not a coincidence. It is data. It is the record of a person who has repeatedly, across years and circumstances, found a way through. And it is the bedrock on which genuine, durable faith can be built. The first layer of unshakable faith is this retrospective recognition. Things have always found a way to work out. Not always in the way I planned, not always on the timeline I preferred, not always in ways I would have chosen in advance, but worked out, yes, consistently, repeatedly, always. The second layer is the distinction between faith and attachment. These two things are easily confused, but they are fundamentally different. And confusing them is one of the most common reasons people's faith collapses. Attachment says, I trust that things will work out, specifically in this particular way, on this particular timeline, producing this particular outcome. When events deviate from the specific expectation, attachment reads this as evidence that things are not, in fact, working out. Faith is devastated. The person concludes the principle doesn't work. Faith says, I trust that things are working out in some way that serves my highest good, which may or may not match my current preferences. When events deviate from the plan, faith responds with curiosity. Interesting. What is this redirect showing me? Faith remains intact precisely because it was never dependent on a specific outcome to begin with. This distinction is everything. Holding your preferences lightly, knowing clearly what you want while remaining genuinely open to how it arrives, is what allows faith to remain strong through the inevitable surprises and deviations of a real life. Daily practices build and maintain this faith in tangible, practical ways. Gratitude, particularly gratitude for things that haven't arrived yet, expressed as if they're already on their way, trains your expectation system to anticipate good. Journaling, specifically reviewing past evidence that things have worked out, builds the retrospective case that makes forward-facing faith rational rather than naive. Meditation and intentional stillness create the internal spaciousness where faith can be felt rather than merely thought. The people you surround yourself with are also a significant factor. Faith is contagious, but so is doubt. Spending significant time with people who see life as fundamentally working against them will erode even well-built faith over time. This is not about avoiding people who are struggling. Compassion is a core value here. It is about being intentional about whose worldview you absorb most consistently. The darkest test of faith is what contemplatives throughout history have called the dark night of the soul. Those periods when nothing seems to be working, when the certainty feels genuinely unwarranted, when the gap between what you believe and what you see becomes almost impossibly wide. These periods are real. They are not proof that the principle fails. They are, paradoxically, the moments in which faith is forged into something truly unshakable. Because faith that only holds when things are going well is not faith. It is good mood. Real faith maintains its ground when the appearances suggest otherwise, and then watches over time as the truth of its conviction is confirmed. Build your faith on what you know about your own history. Hold it through what you don't yet know about your future, and discover that the two, taken together, leave very little genuine room for despair. Detached involvement, the art of caring deeply without losing yourself. One of the most sophisticated and most frequently misunderstood dimensions of living from certainty is what wisdom traditions across cultures have pointed toward for centuries. the simultaneous capacity to care completely and remain unattached to specific outcomes. In Western culture, this idea often gets dismissed as passivity, as a kind of spiritualized indifference that produces nothing and protects against everything. But that misreads it entirely. Detached involvement isn't apathy. It isn't resignation. It is the most advanced form of committed engagement available to a human being. Here is what it actually looks like in practice. You have a goal you care about deeply. You work toward it with everything you have. You bring your full intelligence, creativity, and energy to the pursuit. You persist through obstacles and learn from setbacks. And simultaneously, you remain genuinely open to the possibility that the outcome might look different than you currently envision. That what arrives might be better than what you planned, delivered in a form you wouldn't have chosen in advance. This combination, maximum effort plus minimum attachment to specific outcomes, is the state from which the most effective action, the most creative problem-solving, and the most durable resilience consistently emerge. Most people operate from one of two dysfunctional extremes. Either they are so attached to specific outcomes that they become rigid, anxious, and controlling, unable to adapt when reality inevitably deviates from their plans, or they are so detached that they become passive, vague, and uncommitted, treating surrendering to the universe as a substitute for showing up and doing the work. Neither extreme produces good results, and both share a common root, a fear of being in the messy, uncomfortable middle of genuine engagement with uncertain outcomes. The middle path, detached involvement, requires you to clarify the difference between your authentic desires and your ego's demands. Your authentic desires are simple, clean, and deeply personal. To do meaningful work, to love and be loved, to contribute something real, to grow into the fullest version of yourself. Your ego's demands are typically about external validation. To be recognized as the best, to prove something to specific people, to achieve particular status markers. When you are pursuing authentic desires, detachment comes naturally, because you can trust that those desires can be fulfilled through multiple paths, not just the one you've currently mapped. When you are driven by ego demands, detachment feels threatening, because you've convinced yourself that only one specific outcome can give you what you need. Clarifying which one is running the show at any given moment is one of the most valuable forms of self-awareness available to you. Detached involvement also transforms the way you relate to both criticism and praise. When you're attached to specific outcomes, criticism feels like a threat to your goals, and praise feels like temporary relief from your anxiety. When you're practicing detached involvement, both become simply information, inputs that might help you improve without having any bearing on your fundamental worth or the ultimate direction of your journey. Practically speaking, this orientation shows up in how you make decisions under pressure. Leaders who practice detached involvement can make difficult calls without being paralyzed by the need for everyone's approval. They can take calculated risks without being devastated if those risks don't produce the expected return. They can stay in the game long enough for the compound effects of consistent effort to become visible, because they're not burning out on the emotional roller coaster of attachment to each individual outcome. The financial implications are particularly significant. When you're attached to money as a measure of your worth or safety, financial decisions get made from fear and scarcity, even in moments of relative abundance. When you practice detached involvement with money, you can make strategic decisions from clarity and wisdom, investing in growth, taking intelligent risks, being appropriately generous, while trusting that your needs will be met regardless of whether any specific venture produces the expected return. At its deepest level, detached involvement is a recognition that you are not the only intelligence at work in your life. There are social dynamics, market forces, relationship patterns, and natural cycles operating at scales far beyond your individual awareness. And aligning with these larger currents rather than fighting against them is how the most elegant and effective outcomes become possible. Do your part with absolute dedication. Hold your vision with passionate commitment. And trust that what arrives, however it arrives, is exactly what you needed. Alignment, when your whole life points in the same direction. True mastery of the certainty orientation is not achieved by thinking the right thoughts in your morning journaling session and then living the rest of your day from contradictory assumptions. It is achieved when your thoughts, emotions, language, actions, environment, and relationships are all consistently pointing in the same direction. This is what is meant by alignment, and it is the state in which the full creative power of this way of being becomes available to you. Most people experience a significant gap between their stated beliefs and their lived behaviors. They'll tell you, and genuinely mean it, that they believe in abundance, but they make financial decisions from scarcity. They'll tell you they believe in their own capability, but they procrastinate on the things that most clearly demonstrate it. They'll tell you they trust that things will work out, but they lie awake at 3 a.m. catastrophizing about outcomes they cannot control. These internal contradictions are not character flaws. They are simply the natural result of having positive aspirations living alongside old, deep-seated neural patterns that haven't yet caught up. The work of alignment is the work of closing that gap consistently across every domain of your life. Your thought patterns are the starting point. Every thought either reinforces or undermines your belief that things are working in your favor. Thoughts about what might go wrong, what you might be lacking, what others might think. When these dominate your internal landscape, they create a misaligned baseline from which no amount of positive self-talk can fully compensate. The practice is not to eliminate these thoughts. That's neither possible nor necessary, but to notice them without being ruled by them, and to consistently redirect your mental attention toward more empowering interpretations. Your emotional life is equally important. Emotions are not just feelings. They are energy states that carry their own momentum and influence your biology, your perception, and your behavior in tangible ways. Learning to consciously cultivate emotional states that are consistent with your desired reality, gratitude, enthusiasm, calm confidence, genuine appreciation, is one of the highest leverage practices available to you. This is not emotional suppression. It is emotional leadership. Choosing the feeling you want to inhabit rather than simply reacting to whatever feeling the environment triggers. Your language, the words you speak to yourself and others about your life, is where misalignment most visibly reveals itself. When you complain habitually or describe your goals as dreams rather than plans, or speak of your challenges as permanent rather than temporary, you are using the most powerful creative tool available to human beings, language, to reinforce exactly the opposite of what you want to create. Conversely, when you speak with clarity and confidence about where you're heading, when you describe setbacks as part of the journey rather than evidence against it, you are using language to build the reality you intend to inhabit. Your environment deserves more attention than most people give it. The spaces where you spend significant time are not neutral containers. They actively shape your mood, your cognitive state, and your baseline energetic frequency. An environment of order, beauty, and intention supports the clear, confident, forward-oriented mental state that certainty requires. This does not mean expensive. It means intentional, designed to reflect and reinforce the reality you are in the process of creating. Your daily habits, the morning rituals, the movement practices, the nutritional choices, the sleep patterns, are the physical infrastructure on which all of this runs. You cannot sustain genuine certainty and high energetic output on a body that's chronically depleted, overstimulated, and under-recovered. Taking extraordinary care of your physical health is not separate from the psychological work described in this book. It is the same work, expressed at the physiological level. Your financial behaviors reveal your actual beliefs with particular clarity. Every spending, saving, and investing decision reflects whether abundance or scarcity is your true operating assumption, not the one you claim to hold, but the one your behavior confirms, gradually aligning your financial behavior with abundance assumptions. Being appropriately generous, investing in your own growth, making decisions from confidence rather than fear, builds the real-world conditions that your certainty requires. When all of these elements, thought, emotion, language, environment, habit, financial behavior, and relationship choice, are aligned in the same direction, you stop experiencing the internal friction that makes growth feel so effortful. Life begins to feel like it's moving with you rather than against you. Not because the external world has changed, but because you have stopped working against yourself at every level. True alignment is not a destination you reach once. It is a daily, ongoing, deeply rewarding practice. And every step toward it returns dividends that compound across every dimension of your life. The compound effect of certainty, small choices that create extraordinary lives. Compound interest is one of the most powerful forces in the financial world. The mechanism by which small, consistent deposits grow into extraordinary wealth over time, not through dramatic individual contributions, but through the relentless accumulation of incremental gains. Most people understand this principle when applied to money. Almost nobody applies it to the rest of their lives, where it operates with equal power and even more profound results. Every choice you make from genuine certainty, every moment you redirect from fear to trust, from worst-case thinking to possibility thinking, from scarcity to abundance, is a deposit. These deposits are often invisible in the moment. No single day of inspired action transforms a career. No single conversation entered with confident expectation rewrites a relationship. No single decision made from abundance rather than scarcity produces a financial breakthrough. But the accumulation does, inevitably, mathematically, with the same inexorable momentum that compound interest generates over decades. In your professional life, the compound effect of certainty manifests as a reputation, the most valuable and non-replicable professional asset you can build. Every project approached with the expectation of a creative solution builds slightly more credibility. Every obstacle navigated with equanimity rather than crisis adds another layer to your perceived reliability. Every relationship cultivated with authentic generosity deepens your network's investment in your success. None of these individual moments are visible on a spreadsheet, but across years, they accumulate into the kind of professional standing that generates extraordinary opportunities, the kind that appear to look like luck from the outside. In your health, the compound effect operates in both directions with ruthless consistency. Every small decision that honors your body's capacity for strength and vitality, the morning walk, the quality of sleep you protect, the nutritional choices you make when no one is watching, builds on the previous ones. And because health compounds over time just as money does, the choices you make in your 30s shape the person you are in your 50s in ways that dwarf any single medical intervention. In your finances, certainty-based decision-making compounds toward wealth not just through investment returns, but through the behavioral patterns it generates. The person who consistently invests in their own development negotiates from confidence rather than scarcity, pursues opportunities they'd otherwise dismiss as not for someone like me, and makes financial decisions from abundance rather than fear. This person's trajectory curves upward in ways that are almost imperceptible in any single year, but become extraordinary over a decade. In your relationships, the compound effect of certainty may be the most personally significant of all. Every interaction where you assume good intentions builds goodwill. Every conversation where you listen fully deepens trust. Every moment where you show up authentically rather than strategically creates real connection. Over time, these interactions accumulate into relationships of extraordinary depth, loyalty, and mutual support, the kind that provide meaning, belonging, and practical assistance throughout the full arc of your life. And in your self-concept, your fundamental sense of who you are and what you're capable of, the compound effect of certainty is perhaps most radical. Every time you take an action that aligns with a more empowered version of yourself, you deposit evidence that this version is real. The evidence accumulates, the identity solidifies, and at some point, impossible to pin to a specific date but unmistakable when it arrives, you realize that the person you were practicing being has simply become the person you are. The most important understanding about the compound effect is that you cannot opt out of it. You are already experiencing it, for better or worse. Every day you spend operating from uncertainty and fear is a deposit in a different account, building momentum toward a different compound outcome. The good news is that this momentum can be redirected at any moment. You do not have to undo the past to change the trajectory. You only have to change the next choice, and the next one after that. Small things, done consistently, from a place of genuine certainty, build extraordinary lives. Not eventually, inevitably. The flow of miracles, when synchronicity becomes your normal, when you have been practicing this orientation long enough, when certainty has stopped being something you remind yourself of and becomes something you simply inhabit. Something remarkable begins to happen in the texture of your daily life. Coincidences become frequent enough to notice. You think of someone and they appear. You need a piece of information and it arrives from an unexpected source. You're facing a specific challenge and you encounter exactly the resource you need in a context that makes no logical sense. Solutions to problems emerge in the middle of showers, walks, and conversations that had nothing to do with the problem. The right people show up at the right moments with what feels like impossible precision. This is what some researchers call synchronicity, and what others, more cautiously, call confirmation bias. The debate about which it is misses something important. Because whether these experiences are genuinely meaningful coincidences or simply a reflection of your heightened attention to positive signals, the practical effect is the same. Your world begins to feel like it's actively cooperating with your aspirations. And in a very real, behaviorally measurable sense, it is. When your nervous system is no longer chronically activated by worry and anticipatory dread, your perceptual field expands. You notice more. You are present to more. The opportunities that were always there, but invisible behind the fog of anxiety, become visible. The connections that were always possible, but blocked by the walls of defensive self-protection, become available. This is not mysticism. This is the practical result of moving through the world with open eyes rather than with the tunnel vision of fear. Intuition becomes a more reliable and accessible faculty. When your mind is not cluttered with worst-case scenarios and elaborate defensive strategies, the quieter signal of genuine inner knowing can be heard more clearly. You make decisions more quickly, not impulsively, but confidently. You trust your instincts in situations where you previously would have second-guessed yourself into paralysis. And you find with increasing consistency that your instincts were right. Creativity expands dramatically. The relaxed, open state of mind that accompanies genuine certainty is precisely the state in which insight and innovation are most likely to emerge. The prefrontal cortex, already working more effectively without the constant drain of fear-based processing, produces more lateral connections, more novel solutions, more elegant approaches to complex problems. People who consistently operate from this state tend to become known for their creative intelligence in ways that feel almost magical to observers, but are simply the natural output of a well-functioning mind no longer compromised by chronic anxiety. Health and vitality tend to improve measurably. The physiological consequences of sustained stress, elevated cortisol, inflammatory markers, disrupted sleep, compromised immune function, begin to reverse when the psychological operating system shifts towards certainty and trust. Energy levels stabilize at higher baselines. Recovery from illness and injury accelerates. The physical experience of living in a body that isn't constantly braced for impact is, for many people, transformative in itself. Financial abundance often follows, not as a magical consequence, but as the natural result of better decisions made from a better state. Investment in growth, calculated risk-taking, authentic relationship building, and consistent inspired action, the behavioral outputs of certainty, compound into financial outcomes that feel from the outside like luck or exceptional timing. But perhaps the most significant aspect of this flow state is how it changes your relationship with the concept of miracles itself. What previously felt exceptional, the unexpected opportunity, the perfectly timed connection, the surprising solution, begins to feel ordinary. Not because the world has changed, but because your alignment with it has become consistent enough that these experiences are no longer rare departures from normal. They are normal. You realize, with increasing clarity, that you were never really acting as if things were working in your favor. You were recognizing a truth that was always there, simply previously invisible, behind the interference of fear. The universe has been conspiring in your favor all along. You've just finally learned to cooperate with it. Your new reality, when acting becomes being. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, and impossible to schedule, when you realize that you are no longer practicing this orientation. You are living it. You notice it in the small things first. The decision you would have agonized over for days, you make it in 10 minutes without apology and move on. The setback that would have sent you into a spiral of self-doubt, you feel the disappointment genuinely, extract what it's showing you, and redirect within hours. The uncertain situation that would have kept you awake, refreshing anxious thoughts, you rest, trusting that clarity will arrive when it's needed. And it does. The shift from acting as if to simply being is not dramatic. It accumulates so gradually that you may not notice it until someone who knew you before points it out. You seem different, they say. Or, how do you stay so calm? Or, I don't know how you always manage to land on your feet. And you realize it isn't something you're doing anymore. It's something you've become. Your problem solving has been quietly revolutionized. Where before you saw dead ends, you now habitually see detours. Where before you felt blocked by obstacles, you now experience a kind of automatic curiosity about what they're redirecting you toward. You don't have to consciously remind yourself to look for the opportunity in the difficulty. The looking happens automatically, because it's become your default orientation to the world. Your career or professional life has evolved, sometimes dramatically, sometimes subtly, but always in the direction of greater alignment with who you actually are. Either you're doing different work that reflects your real capabilities, or you're doing similar work with entirely different energy and results. Your relationship with recognition and status has shifted as well. You still appreciate acknowledgement, but you no longer require it to feel valid. This freedom from external validation makes you simultaneously more effective and more pleasant to work alongside. Your relationships have deepened across the board. The people in your life who can meet you where you are now, in this place of genuine openness, groundedness, and positive expectation, have become closer. The relationships that were anchored in mutual anxiety, scarcity, or dysfunction have naturally fallen away, not through drama, but through simple incompatibility. You've stopped trying to be different things to different people. You've simply become more fully yourself and discovered that this, more than any performance you might have maintained, is what draws people toward you. Your financial relationship has matured. You neither worship money nor fear it. You use it as what it actually is, a tool, a resource, an energy that flows through your life in service of your values. Abundance, in its truest sense, has stopped being a destination and become a daily experience, not because you have everything, but because you've stopped experiencing what you have through the lens of what you lack. Your body has become an ally rather than a system you're managing against constant breakdown. The vitality that emerges when chronic stress is replaced by calm certainty is remarkable, and once experienced, impossible to willingly surrender. You move, rest, eat, and recover from a place of basic trust in your body's capacity rather than anxious monitoring of its limitations. And underneath all of it, the career, the relationships, the health, the finances, there is something more foundational that has changed, a quality of peace that doesn't depend on external conditions. A deep structural trust in the goodness and cooperativeness of life that remains stable across the full range of circumstances, comfortable and uncomfortable alike. This pass does not mean the absence of challenge. Challenges continue to arrive. They always will, because challenge is simply what growth looks like from the inside. But your relationship with challenge has been permanently altered. You no longer meet difficulty with the braced, contracted energy of someone who is uncertain whether they can handle what's coming. You meet it with the grounded, open energy of someone who has repeatedly discovered that they can. You have not changed the external world. That was never the project. You have changed your relationship with it, your assumptions about it, your interpretations of it, your expectations from it, your energetic engagement with it. And in doing so, you have discovered what the most effective, most fulfilled, most genuinely alive human beings across history have always known. Life conspires in your favor. It always has. The only thing that ever needed to change was your ability to see it and your willingness to act accordingly. You are no longer someone who is trying to believe this. You are someone who lives it fully, daily, without apology, without performance, without needing anyone else to confirm it before it's real. This is your new reality. Not a destination you've arrived at, a way of moving through the world that you have finally made your own. Welcome home.